Hello everyone, welcome to my stream. I know I wanted to start earlier and I apologize to everyone for not making it a little bit before. The thing is that I was teaching and one of my students is preparing for an exam, so I had to put in a little bit of extra work to help them get ready for their exam. What we're going to do tonight is a little bit different from the previous stream in the morning. We're going to look at some current, mainly policy-related and international politics-related writings. And we're going to take a quick look at some of the headlines. It's nothing stellar. I'm not an expert on all the topics that I'm going to discuss, but it might be interesting for you if you want to know some headlines, and we can briefly reflect on it. If you want to join in the chat, just do so. So I'm going to share the links. First, I'm going to have a look at what's new at Politico. Politico is quite good. It gives a decent overview of mainly some of the major US interests in politics. And what we get is some quick news. They emphasize that the Russian vaccine has been accepted in more and more countries, which is true. I'm Hungarian. Hungary has been using the Russian vaccine, and it's been working pretty well. It's safe. There has been a recent study by the AstraZeneca team, and they also said it's pretty good. Seems to be decent. I can understand why this is something that bothers the US. I mean, one of the main reasons is obviously that the Russians, in developing the vaccine, neglected the WHO standards, so they didn't follow the normal way of completing all the stage 3 trials, and that's pretty risky. And also, of course, it harms US business. At the moment, Moderna and Pfizer are the biggest distributors and producers of vaccines, and they're making a lot of money by that, and of course, earning a lot of credits for the US. So they're not that happy that that gets disrupted. You can read a bit more about the story and the little bit, I would say, US skewed view on this here. The other interesting thing is that Biden won't release the White House visitor logs. This is an interesting thing. I don't know whether all the US presidents and their teams release the visitors logs. Yeah. It seems that at Obama's time, this was a standard thing to do. So whoever paid a formal visit to the White House, a log has been published. And so far, Biden does not seem to want to do the same. Trump obviously didn't do that. And anyway, his planning has been, I've read, quite chaotic. So it was very hard for people to follow who he was meeting on what terms and what was the agenda in the different meetings. Usually, formally, the White House staff, which doesn't necessarily change so often, commit to releasing the visitor logs. But at the moment, there's a funny thing where a lot of people Biden and members of his team have meetings with are meeting virtually, are meeting people online. And that's a separate thing, right? So there is a little bit of a loophole here where information can be omitted and sharing relevant, interesting information can be omitted. And it seems that Biden's team might want to make use of this. That's not wonderful. It's nice to know who the most powerful and influential president of the planet is meeting on formal terms. I mean, arguably, some people would say that's China now, but I think that's a bit hasty at this point yet. Although, clearly, the US is not as far ahead anymore as it has been. So one of the interesting things that has been going on is And I'm really, really curious how this is going to play out. So this Politico article on the Biden team's policies says, in recent days, those groups have sent letters to the White House questioning practices and asking for policy changes. The center-left Brookings Institution issued a new 70-page ethics report that urged more openness to restore trust in democracy after Trump shattered norm after norm. So you get this little quote. It's very interesting. And what I'm wondering here is the following kind of dynamic that's going to happen. That now that Biden has been elected, there's going to be an enormous pressure because many people see him as sort of a savior. Many people see him as potentially bringing in a lot of positive changes. But there is going to be so much lobbying, so much pressure, so many petitions coming to him. It's impossible that he can accommodate all of them. And there will be a lot of disappointed people, either because his team simply doesn't have the capacity to work through all the requests, and some requests which are judged by them to be maybe lower priority or not that urgent. They will be neglected for some time, or put aside, put on hold for a while. The other thing here to consider is that there will be just some conflicting demands. I mean, just because he is sort of a, on American political terms, he's sort of a, well, I would say he's a centrist, conservative, relatively conservative, centrist candidate. He won't be able or doesn't want to accommodate every request. That might create some dissent and disappointment around his presidency. So I'm interested in seeing how that plays out. Also, what we have seen in the last 5-10 years, more and more, maybe since 2005 actually, there are a lot of NGOs set up by political parties, business people connected to political parties in all countries. And these are sometimes set up as quasi weapons of pressuring the opponents. So there are NGOs which address real concerns and employ experts who agree with those concerns and have worked on them. But usually this kind of weaponized NGO employs a sort of white propaganda approach. So they selectively only publish the elements of narratives and findings which support their case. Now, something like this might be used against Biden as well. So this is a danger I think his team has to look out. And they should maybe go ahead and have a very clear communication about what they are going to do, rather than leave things hazy and leave things undecided and giving a larger surface for attack. Right. So on his first full day in office, Obama offered a sweeping promise of transparency, issuing an executive order and 2 memoranda that made openness the presumption at agencies. Many open government advocates say that Obama fell short of his goals on a host of fronts. But they still say that Biden should have issued a presidential memo on his first day of office to outline his transparency goals. So this is exactly what I was saying. I haven't read the article in advance. I'm just browsing the news together with you right now. This is exactly what I've been saying. I think it's a better policy to have at least some policy lines. So, well, we'll see how Biden's team tackles this. I don't live in the US, and recently I've been occupied by other issues. I haven't followed what's going on around Biden's team so closely. So I wonder how people are perceiving his actions on this front. This is gonna be crucial, I think, especially for the more verbose Democratic voters. I mean, every country has smart voters and informed voters who look into a lot of issues. They take time to get good quality information, reflect on it, discuss it with informed friends. But not everyone is like that. And for some people who are a bit more superficial, spend less time on gathering good information, or are just not able to do it for a variety of reasons, lack of time, lack of energy, lack of access, whatever. These kind of things might send the wrong message. Right. Anyway, so that's it for Politico. That's an interesting thing. One of the things that's informative is that their most read article at the moment is that trapped in Germany's COVID nightmare. So one of the funny things is this. Let's have a quick look about what's going on here. So let's check the COVID numbers globally, because this is it's said here. We read that Germany has a COVID nightmare and some people are trapped in there. That sounds very bad and scary. Now, what you need to know as background is that Germany has been getting a lot of shelling from US media, and a lot of that is motivated by foreign policy objectives of the US. Globally, at the moment, there are about close to 115 million cases. Out of that, the US is leading with about 30 million cases. Germany is around 2.5 million cases. Now, this is funny because Germany's population is about 80 million. The US's population is about 350. So it's about, say, 4.5 times that on Germany. So if you multiply the German number, 2.5 million, by 4.5, we still get less than half of the US number. We get 12.5 million cases for Germany if we would multiply their population number out to be the same as the US's. Still a much lower number than the US number, and the ratio of total death seems to be, well, that seems to be a bit high. That's 70,000 in Germany. So if you would multiply that, we would get something around 300,000, but the US is above 500,000. So even in number of deaths, Germany just seems to be doing better than the US. In fact, it's not doing that horribly at all. Their total infection count is relatively high, but that's partly caused by the fact that they're in the middle of Europe and they're pretty big. They're about 80 million people. I wonder what the person had in mind when they wrote about Germany's COVID health, because to be honest, this doesn't look so bad. Deaths per 1 million population for the US, 1,582. For Germany, 842. So this is what I always say. When we see these kind of alarmist, scary titles, we really have to look a little bit behind. We really have to check what exactly is going on. And this is the article. You can see this trapped in Germany's COVID nightmare. Someone sent Matthew Karnitschnig sent a letter to Politico, and he's the chief Europe correspondent. Right. So the narrative here seems to be that as the coronavirus pandemic raged through the United States last summer, an old school friend from Arizona wrote me of full admiration for Germany's handling of the crisis. Well, this is strange because Germany's handling of the crisis hasn't really been praised in Europe in general. By last summer, people were like, well, it's pretty average. Strange. Maybe in the US, some people perceived it as very good, but it actually wasn't. Germany appeared to many Americans to have done everything right. I highly doubt this. Many people criticize Germany for not having been strict enough. How crazy it must be, my friend wrote, to be an American journalist in Germany watching from afar as the US basically falls apart. Oh my God, this kind of exaggeration just kills me. I never understand why people do this. This week, Germany will enter its 5th straight month of lockdown with no end in sight. Though infection rates have declined in recent weeks, it remains unclear when schools and shops, not to mention restaurants and bars, will reopen. That's absolutely true. The situation hasn't been very good in Germany, and it isn't very good now. Amid the uncertainty, small businesses across the country are facing ruin. That's a huge issue everywhere. Yeah, such fears, coupled with frustration over the seemingly never-ending restrictions, have soured the national mood. I can imagine that. Definitely, that's probably true. Right. The reason for this reversal of fortune can be explained in a single word: vaccines. So I think this is a horribly inaccurate claim, like saying that there has been a reversal of fortune. I mean, the numbers just don't bear this out. It's possible that the rates are dropping quite sharply in some US regions. But I mean, there isn't much reason to think that that this is especially bad. So there are, well, look, so this is a very interesting paragraph. This is the kind of strange haziness and anti-European sentiment that I notice in a lot of European correspondent writing. As of Friday, the US had administered about 68 million doses of coronavirus vaccine, reaching about 14% of the population with at least one shot. Okay, so 68 million doses of vaccine. For its part, Germany had delivered about 5.7 million jabs, a lot less, right? Less than 10%, covering about 4.5% of the population. Clear. On this account, the US has been doing quite well. In other words, less than a third the rate of the US. Yep. The problem isn't that Germany doesn't have enough vaccines. It isn't. I mean, it did look like that was the problem in Europe in general, but rather that it has been slow to get them into people's arms. And this is where the article basically contradicts itself. So it says, of the 8.5 million doses Germany has received so far, it has only used 68%. So the complaint is that the US has inoculated 14% of the population, 68 million people, whereas Germany has only inoculated 5.7. Now, not inoculated, but given at least one jab to 5.7 million people. How could it have done 14%, which would be in Germany something around 12 million, if they have only received 8.5 million doses? And then the supposed US superiority comes at the end. The 68% with Germany administered of their available vaccines compares to a rate of 75% in the US. I mean, that's not that brilliant. It's a 7%. It's a big difference. Don't get me wrong. It's 7% more. But Germany and Europe in general started later because it has been the case often that the US health and food advisory regulations don't meet the European standards or don't match them. There are many healthcare products, many agricultural and food products which we don't allow to be sold and used in the EU, and for good reasons. I mean, in general, the health of the population is at in a very different level. I mean, there are a lot of things on this list of sugar levels in food. And the US was basically here. What it seems to me is that they were more willing to gamble on just pushing ahead very aggressively and starting to dole out the vaccinations, whereas Europe has been a bit more cautious. So I would imagine that by the time Germany will receive 68 million doses, they will have a pretty good rate of the proportion of the population who will be vaccinated. So this kind of biases are something you have to look out for. And you can also see that the paper is pretty unexperienced and system. For example, there is this paragraph in this article: fax machines, a technological dinosaur elsewhere in the West. Fax machines remain a mainstay in many medical practices, government health offices. That has made coordination across Germany's nearly 400 health offices particularly difficult. This is absolute nonsense. Fax machines are used very widely in the US, Japan, and many other countries. And this is a funny thing. The reason why this is so is because on a fax, you can sign and send the signed copy. And in most countries and internationally, this is usually recognized as an official signed copy. Whereas if you scan a signed copy and send the scanned document, that in many countries is not recognized with the same force. Now, often in healthcare, you need to quickly send signed forms, and that's why healthcare uses fax machines. What the author, the Europe chief correspondent of Politico, is writing here is absolute nonsense, and it sadly shows off that he's just not aware of how communication in healthcare happens and what regulations are in place. So not the best person to write about this and compare the US favorably with Germany. To be honest, it doesn't matter. I think it's a very silly thing to look at this comparatively. It has been disastrous that nation states and diplomacy took a competitive approach to the whole issue, but it is what we are stuck with. And then we get this kind of article. It just doesn't help at all. I'm not saying that we should be praising Germany instead of the US. We just shouldn't get into this kind of articles, and we shouldn't write this kind of headline grabbing things. The other thing that irks me very, very much, there has been a similar article a couple of weeks ago where they were like, oh, Japan has done so poorly. And is this journalist, and I checked what resources they used, and there were a lot of things they haven't checked. They got numbers wrong and facts wrong. And, why is a journalist assessing a country's response to a totally new infection and the deployment of a totally new vaccine? If even the researchers and ministries specializing on these issues are not sure about everything, you don't see any serious peer-reviewed research papers ranking or comparing substantially and saying, well, this is objectively just a better response pattern. We can't do it yet. We don't have the data. We don't have any idea how the whole thing will play out. So this kind of thing, I think this is just very shoddy journalism. It's basically attention grabbing, and it makes me very furious in the sense that they earn a lot of money with this. It just riles people up. It just makes some people proud, others angry for the totally wrong reason, and we don't really get to know what's going on. I mean, should the Germans now do everything like the Americans do? Why? I mean, we don't know yet how the whole thing plays out. And there are so many differences between the healthcare systems, the countries, the population sizes, the spreading of the disease. It's just not helpful to have this kind of article. Anyway, let's leave Politico at that. They're usually good, but you occasionally get this kind of strange stuff as well. Well, they need the clicks and the advertisement income as well, of course. Let's have a quick look at the European Policy Center. They publish some interesting stuff. So what are their headlines? When will the EU finally get serious about digitalizing its businesses? That's one of the headlines. That, I'll be honest with you, that straight away looks like techie propaganda. Google, Apple, IBM, Microsoft have been spending fortunes recently in lobbying in the EU, in Brussels, to get through some more lenient, more relaxed regulations regarding how they have to treat people's privacy, how they can sell, share, use private data, how transparent they have to be about taxation and how they use their finances, how much of their income do they have to pay taxes after in the EU. And they've been very aggressive. I'm a little bit suspicious. It seems to me that they have found their way to some journalists who managed to get some material in their favor out there. So let's have a quick look at what they write in this article. So this is written by Frederico Mollet. It's a commentary, right? So it's not an analysis piece. And what it says is, if Europe is really to be fit for the digital age, what should most concern policymakers is not the fate of cutting-edge startups, but rather the long tail of conventional companies that have failed to digitalize. So far, its budget allocations have not reflected this challenge, but the new multi-annual financial framework and resilience and recovery facility are an opportunity to rectify this. So basically what we're going to see here is someone is arguing that the multi-annual financial framework and resilience and recovery facility should spend its money on buying digital infrastructure products and distribute it among smaller and medium-sized companies. This is a very interesting proposal. It might be one way in which the EU can genuinely help some businesses to become more competitive. They might be able to cut costs if they have better access to software and hardware. I think what is needed, that's just from my own impressions, what is direly needed is a lot of free training opportunities, especially for people above 40 who don't have the necessary IT skills. So the first sentence is already very suspect. Policymakers often lament Europe's poor digital performance. Who? Which policymakers? The US ones do, because Europe is not buying as many products as they would wish it would do. They bemoan the lack of companies with a scale of success like Google or Apple. That's true. A lot of Europeans are butthurt about this, and seek to foster digital companies that can rise to the challenge of US or Asian giants at the technological frontier. That's absolutely true as well. There have been some attempts to promote and incubate successful companies, tech companies. It hasn't really been borne out. I mean, my hunch is that one of the main reasons is that there just isn't enough money around this. A lot of people I've known, US companies were able to pay for them to basically fly back and forth between Europe. They could live like half time in their cozy village somewhere in France and fly out for the job sometimes to Dallas or Texas or San Francisco or wherever they were needed or deployed. Europeans were just not willing to spend this amount of money, and a lot of good talent has just been snagged up. And it's the same with Chinese and Indian talent as well. A lot of it has been sucked up by the US and very cleverly kept by them. But this is a political and economic question. But our man here is that where Europe has truly lagged is that the existing businesses have not been restructured to reap the productivity improvements. Now, the interesting thing is what productivity improvements he's talking about. Because it's true that there has been an investment boom around tech, and every major company and organization, schools, hospitals, whatever, spend a crazy amount of money on tech. But the adoption rates are very high. So we get a figure here. You can check this wonderful figure that the US companies and organizations adopt technology at higher rates and faster than the Europeans do. But what does this mean? It doesn't automatically translate into efficiency. And there has been research which showed that digitalization translates into efficiency quite poorly. Sometimes it doesn't translate into efficiency at all. It takes years to translate into efficiency. So, you know, when you read this, it's good to be a little bit skeptical. Right. And as the author notes, I mean, this is a very sensible point, actually. As one would expect, the severity of the problem varies between member states. 27% of EU companies had high digital intensity in 2019, but in Denmark, the figure was 53% compared to 10% in Romania. But it's not a simple story of East versus West, or North versus South, which is often the simple story in Europe. In Germany, the figure was 28%, while France was below the EU average at 24%. Neither is this phenomenon restricted to small and medium-sized enterprises. Oh, that's surprising. Although they are by far the worst performers. Across all sizes, EU firms are less digital than US firms, and around 25% of large firms in the EIB's survey report have not digitalized. Now, one of the things that would need to be checked here is, which firms actually need and benefited from digitalization the most? I'm pretty sure that not all of them, and there are many forms of digitalization. So it's a very different thing to have robots working in your company. It's a different thing to do your finances digitally. It's a different thing to plan your projects digitally. So it's a bit vague. Really, the interesting bit would be, and I think what is sort of missing in this kind of oh, there's a problem we have to solve articles very often, is they're saying it's underfinanced, there isn't enough investment in it, we are not as digitalized as the US, etc., etc., etc. But where is any proof of the effects of this? There's just none. I mean, besides the investment, a lot of people are pouring their money into this US companies, large, especially the big ones, because they sell so many products. But where is the proof that this has really benefited profoundly the US companies which have digitalized? No data on anything like this here. Huh. Interesting. Very, very interesting. What I'm saying here is not that the EU shouldn't push digitalization or support digitalization, but what I do think is that we should be a lot more selective about digitalization. So, for example, I've worked in higher education for a number of years in the UK. Not very, the number of those years is rather low. But what I saw was that there was a lot of digitalization, and a lot of it was driven by techie people who were like, well, we need the latest software. Our software is not good enough. It's causing problems here and there. We could be more efficient. But there was never really any proof. It was always more like, well, you know, there is new software which is supposed to be better, or one of the managers who wanted to head a flagship project which can lead to their promotion, or them jumping positions. They were like, well, we need to improve the efficiency and streamline project, and we can tie in an IT project nicely. But you always have to see that while people genuinely want to usually boost the performance and improve the quality of services that their organization provides, because that's how they make money and that's how they ensure that they will have a job and get nice bonuses, they also want to be having large projects. They also want to have large budgets. They also want to be the person who headed that $5 or $10 million project. And I mean, IT is an easy way to do that. It's an easy way to look good. It's an easy way to say, well, we are digitalizing so fast. We spent $5 million on this project alone. But then actually checking, tracking, seeing how that helped, whether it boosted efficiency, is very tricky. What I saw in practice was that a lot of stuff, especially more mature stuff, struggled with adopting new technologies. And when new technologies were deployed every couple of years, even with a lot of training sessions, this was very cumbersome for everyone. Sometimes not just for more mature stuff, it's also for younger stuff who, you're working with students and you want to focus on their well-being issues, say, and you have to learn how to use a totally different, complex administrative system every few years. It's just not a very nice experience, and it takes away a lot of your time and energy and effort, and it's also costly because it's going to translate into working hours, right? So HR has to factor this in. So I think we need to be a lot smarter about digitalization. Just digitalization for the sake of digitalization across the board does not seem to be doing too much for anyone. Well, anyway, it's an interesting thing. I take back what I said at the beginning. I don't think this is necessarily an article which is shilling for techies, but I think that there is a kind of optimism that digitalization is in itself something good and we have to push it. I think we need to be a lot more selective. In some fields, yes. I think if you have a certain size of company, you should digitalize your finance, you should digitalize your IT planning, you should digitalize project tracking. But do you have to digitalize every interaction in a small, say, research department? Do you have to digitalize interactions in a small, I don't know, 10, 15-person car part manufacturer specialist? Not sure at all. I think in those organizations, we should pursue efficiency, and efficiency is going to be what works best for those companies. All right, so here's a policy brief. This is a bit more interesting. This is still the EPC.eu. Solving the affordable housing crisis, turning Invest EU into a success story. So this is by Mihai Palimariciuc. I'm so sorry, I'm 100% sure that I can't pronounce Palimariciuc, his name, properly. And people struggle with my name all the time, but I want to make an effort. If someone can correct me, that would be amazing. Anyway, so this is a policy brief. And what it's about is, it's a short one. The European housing market faces an affordability crisis. The percentage of households that spend over 40% of their disposable income on housing has risen among lower and medium income families. On any given night in the Union, 700,000 people have to spend the night on the street. At the same time, public investment in new social housing and renovation projects has decreased considerably in the past decade. These are all, I mean, this is Michael, and these are all really, really serious issues, definitely. People spend a lot of money on housing, either in form of rent or paying back loans, and it's very, very expensive, even in the cheaper East European countries like Hungary, Romania, Poland, to buy a house or even a flat. People are able to do that at much later ages than the previous generations were. And there's almost zero new social housing. I mean, that's just gone. Neoliberalism ate it up. So anyway, the brief continues. Invest EU, the Union's new investment fund, presents an opportunity to curb this polarizing trend and address the lack of affordable housing in Europe. But to become a success story, the European Investment Advisory Hub, EIAH, which helps select and develop investment projects, must invest more in capacity building to better identify and support bankable project and investment platforms. Member states, meanwhile, must increase public support for housing and use innovative financing instruments to de-risk investment so that affordable housing is a secure and predictable market for the private sector. Finally, the European Commission should clarify the rules on state aid and formulate a clearer definition of social housing. Yeah, absolutely. These are some very, very sensible proposals. I think there is at the moment a sort of, I don't know, this is a good phrase, maybe like a feast or famine situation. Like either your property is so old that it's beyond repair and it's worth next to nothing. Nobody wants it. It's in a location which is hard to access. It doesn't have good infrastructure. The population is decreasing, so jobs are going away. Or it's in a location where prices are just soaring and all the money is pouring in there because everybody wants to win big. Everybody just wants to pick up these properties, which are then going to add within a few years 10, 20, 30, 40% in market value and sell it at or rent it out at a premium. There's no initiative at the moment for sustainable and affordable housing for the private sector, which is a really big problem. I mean, you know, this could be something a lot of people, I think, are looking now for ethical investment opportunities. And having affordable housing, say, 50, 60 square meter flats for young couples with a single kid who are willing to maybe make a 3 or 5 year contract would be a fantastic thing. If you could fix prices, rent prices, or provide a decent loan structure, maybe state funded, EU funded, or just with a good agreement between the EU and the banking sector, these things could thrive. And they can help a lot of things. They can help with the decreasing population problem. They can help with stress levels and anxiety, and in turn, with that, they can help with healthcare. People have fewer healthcare problems if they are less stressed and less burnt out. It can help with performance. If people are happier and calmer, they just do better. They are more creative at work. It can help with a host of issues. So certainly something that is much more a priority than general digitalization across all domains of everything. The recommendations presented in this policy brief are based on insights gathered through the activities under the EPC Task Force on Affordable and Decent Housing Solutions. The task force was set up a year ago in cooperation with the King Bedouin Foundation, Schneider Electric, the European Federation of National Organizations Working with the Homeless, and the Cariplo Foundation. So there is an interesting link. There's a longer report. I'll copy the link here for anyone who's interested in it. You can have a look at some numbers and learn more about this fascinating topic. I really, really respect the people who carry out this kind of work. And so this is Mihai Palimariciuc. He is a junior policy analyst at the European Policy Center. Lovely work, very, very informative and good summary. This is one of the reasons why I like this kind of policy pages. Let's just have a very, very quick look at the conclusion achieved here. Solving the broken relationship between the supply of and demand for affordable housing in Europe is crucial, given the rising number of homelessness and low-income households burdened by housing costs. InvestEU provides an opportunity to increase new affordable housing and renovate the existing supply. Nevertheless, this instrument's success should not be taken for granted. Should the weakness of the preceding investment plan for Europe not be addressed, it would be at the expense of vulnerable people in dire need of housing. Yeah, absolutely. So I think what is suggested here but not set out is what we have seen in many cases in the last 10, 15, 20 years in politics, that there might be formally efficient or formally correct law-abiding democratic institution forms in place, but without the people fulfilling key positions behaving in the right way, morally and socially, they don't work as intended. The institutions in themselves don't do much. They are just a framework which can only act in the right way if their constitutive parts act together in the right way. So imagine it, the way I see it, organizations are group agents. This is my theory of group agency. And they can be seen, some of them can be seen as a single agent. Some kind of organizations, say a high-level EU organization, the parliament, can be seen as a single agent. And that single agent has multiple powers. It's different from an individual human agent. It's very different kinds of powers. It's very different kinds of deliberative processes and functions. And the way it works is it has some constitutive parts. And in virtue of having those constituent parts, it is the agent that it is. And when those constituent parts work together in the right way, that's when the agent, the organization, can use its powers in the right way. Now, whether or not the parts work together well, that depends on the elements of those parts. And the elements of those parts, at some level, are people. So it's a bit like, you might have a healthy stomach, but if for whatever reason some cells start working the wrong way, a disease, an infection, we inject you with something that makes you work, messes up your digestion, you're going to be in trouble. As a whole, you can't work in the right way because one of your constituent parts isn't working in the right way. Well, anyway, so much about my organizational agency theory. Let's have a quick look next at the CSIS. So this is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Their work ties in with my interest in security issues. I've been reading about these kind of things and following the discussions for about 5 years. I've been reading a lot of analysis military analysis, political, diplomatic, some economical, and so what's going on at the CSIS? One of their headlines is a report, Defense Against the Dark Arts in Space, Protecting Space Systems from Counter-Space Weapons. This sounds fascinating. It's not my main interest. Simply because I'm not yet sure how current this risk is. I'm usually interested in current and short-term risks mainly, except for a few catastrophic risks. This seems to me to be a potential short-term risks. I might be wrong. I'm not an expert on this, but maybe it's a current risk already. I might have to read this later, but for the moment, I'll put it aside. There's an interesting podcast episode on the front lines of pandemic diplomacy. Ooh, that sounds fascinating as well. Interactive. How developed is China's arms industry? Wow, nice. Let's have a quick look at this. I think this is such an exciting topic, and everyone is interested in it at the moment. So let's have a look at the introduction. Possessing a highly developed defense industrial base is a prerequisite to becoming a leading military power. While China is already the world's second largest arms producer, the ability of its arms industry to domestically develop certain advanced weapon systems is still growing. If China can successfully strengthen its defense industry, it can reduce its reliance on foreign technologies and establish itself as a global leader in cutting-edge military capabilities. Right. So this is, I think, a goal that the Chinese government is pushing as part of both its One China policy and as part of its Made in China policy, and as part of its policy to be a leader in AI and technology. These are all things that they have endorsed in the past years explicitly. So China's arms industry giants. The Chinese Communist Party CCP has named modernizing the People's Liberation Army PLA among its top priorities. At the 19th Party Congress of the CCP in October 2017, Chinese President Xi Jinping outlined the goal to complete national defense and military modernization by 2035 and to transform the PLA into world-class military by mid-century. I mean, in itself, there's nothing wrong with this. China is one of the largest economies and countries in the world. Population-wise, they are the largest. I think economically, if you look at purchasing power parity, they are also probably the largest, or on par with the US and the EU, and but probably ahead now. And of course, they are between. The US is present in the region. India is a huge neighbor. Russia is a huge neighbor. They want to have a decent army. If they would pursue a different kind of foreign policy than what they do at the moment, this would not be a problem or a risk at all. But it is, in my view. Anyway, so they are pushing quite hard. Upgrading equipment and technologies is a central focus of China's military modernization campaign. From 2010 to 2017, China's annual spending on military equipment rose from 26.2 billion to 63.5 billion. So this is just their spending on military equipment. The total military budget is much higher. It's been around $200 billion, and that's just what we know, so that's the official number. But one of the problems with the Chinese government spending is that the Chinese government has big stakes in many non-government companies. It has many board members on many non-government companies, and also it's not entirely transparent how they spend the money. So arguably, this might be closer to 250 billion or even higher at the moment. Anyway, that makes them by far the second largest spender in terms of military. But probably their military, just their military equipment budget is, I think, higher than, say, Japan's complete annual military budget. So that's just not Japan's equipment budget, that's everything that Japan spends, and it's higher than Germany's or France's or Britain's. Maybe Saudi Arabia is on par, but the complete budget again of Saudi Arabia, not their equipment budget. Wow, very impressive. But of course, again, China is a big country. It has a big budget. It has a big economy, so you would expect this. And prices are going up. A while ago, probably for the same amount of buck, China got more, right? Because the wages were so low, many of the resources were so cheap. But the prices and the wages are going up in China as well, not as fast as, and they haven't reached the level of high-income countries, but it's becoming a middle-income country, or at least some people in some regions working in some professions are getting close to that level. Right. So the vast majority of the equipment and technologies purchased by the PLA are supplied by 9 state-owned enterprises and 1 state-owned research institute. These organizations tend to be conglomerates that own multiple, often dozens of subsidiaries. Okay. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute arms industry database, at least 4 of China's primary arms companies rank among the world's top 25 in 2019 based on value of arms sales. They include Aviation Industry Corporation of China, China Electronics Technology Group Corporation, China North Industries Group Corporation, and China South Industries Group Corporation. So this is very fascinating as well. I think very impressive that China managed to reach these ranks. You have to take into account that since the Second World War, European countries tried not to pour too much money. One, it would have looked bad diplomatically. Two, the European trend was more towards social democracies. So we built up very, very large and very comprehensive social support systems. In Japan as well, Japan has a constitution which forbids it to have offensive capabilities in its army, and it has mostly defensive capabilities, and it's not really selling offensive systems to anyone. So Japanese companies didn't become leading in these fields. So it's mainly the US and, well, Germany, Sweden is actually quite large in these fields. Right, so yeah, most of these things are in the US, and we have a few in Russia, France, and the United Kingdom. And the article says some caution should be taken when comparing arms sales between Chinese companies and those from other countries. As state-owned firms primarily supplying the Chinese military and police, Chinese companies likely price their products differently than private companies in other countries. Substantively, 56.7 billion worth of transactions with Chinese firms probably involves a larger amount of equipment compared to transactions of the same value with private companies in Western countries. This is what I said. Because of all these interconnections, China gets more for the same bucks, right? And just to clarify, I'm not reading this because I want to be alarmist. I don't think in itself there's anything bad with studying how the great powers, China, Russia, and the US behave. This is neutral data. It's just worth knowing, and someone wants to understand the current trends, where the money is going, what the money is doing, and how these enormous countries and their enormous militaries, their very powerful governments are sort of vying for position, trying to, make sure that they cannot be attacked, they cannot be challenged, but also like to have that unspoken threatening factor that if they make a claim, then everyone knows that, okay, they can actually do something as well to enforce their claims. Right, so this is a very, very interesting longer analysis, and what we see is that in terms of the global defense spending, China is probably still only about 1/3 of the US. The rest of NATO together is maybe a little bit higher than China, but that's all of NATO together. Russia is much smaller, but again, Russia is tricky because there's a lot of state-owned stuff, so it's not really clear what exactly their numbers mean. It's not easy to compare. So, wow. The Chinese defense industry has long relied heavily on an absorptive model, in which firms acquire foreign military and dual-use technology and incorporate this into the design and development of products. This approach has significantly reduced the amount of time and money China has had to invest in research and development, testing, and integration. This significantly sped up Chinese efforts to modernize its military and narrow technological gaps, especially in areas such as aviation, naval shipbuilding, and precision strike missile production. This is a very, very interesting thing, this absorptive model. So people often say things like, oh, China is stealing technology, this and that, or they're very smart now and they're developing everything. Well, neither of those things is true in itself. There has been, or most likely has been, a substantial amount of intellectual borrowing, borrowing inspiration from others. However, they have a lot of contracts, smart contracts, where they agree to manufacture some parts if the foreign company that wants those parts manufactured gives them some training or intelligence. They agree on, buying models and then manufacture their own version of it. So basically, they buy maybe an older design and then upgrade it a bit with their own engineers after their own engineers understand the design. This is basically what they did with their bullet trains. They're very fast trains. They bought a number of German and Japanese trains, they reverse engineered them, and then they built a little bit better one based on the understanding that they acquired. This is one way to do things. It's, it is what it is. It's nothing horrible. It's how the world works. Everybody is trying to get this kind of technological information, and in many cases they paid for the products that they based their own developments on. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think one of the notable things is that in many ways China is becoming close to develop some very, very advanced very, very advanced weapon systems on its own, which is something that Europe, the heavy industries of Europe together, and the US were capable of until now. But no one else has really been capable. Russia, to some extent, in some sectors, say fighter jets. But there are two interesting passages here. Chinese arms companies are not alone in reaping benefits from foreign cooperation. In 1998, India and Russia signed an agreement forming a bilateral joint venture known as BrahMos Aerospace to produce supersonic cruise missiles. In Japan, which is heavily reliant on US-made military equipment, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is receiving help from Lockheed Martin to develop a new jet fighter. However, in addition to legally acquiring foreign know-how, China has also illegally copied and stolen foreign military and dual-use technology. In the 1990s, China purchased Russian Su-27 fighter jets and S-300 missile systems and reverse engineered them to assist with designing its J-11 fighter jets and HQ-9 surface-to-air missiles. In 2019, Russia's Rostec accused China of illegally copying various equipments and technologies, including aircraft engines, planes, air defense systems, and missiles. Oh well, you see, this is how things go. So yeah, China is definitely in these fields becoming a leader. And one of the interesting things is that the military tradition of China, due to its size and its historical poverty in the last 70, 80 years, not in the last 10 years, pushed the Chinese governments, the PLA, People's, what's that, PLA, their army, Liberation Army, perhaps, to adopt mass production at cheaper prices. And this forces you to be quite innovative. And it also creates relatively affordable products, which means that countries with smaller budgets will be your buyers and they will be happy with your products. So this is something very, very interesting and something to look out for. And this is one of those aspects where, in diplomatic terms, China can gain many, many favors if they can supply high quality, defense systems or military systems to countries with smaller budgets. And this might be something that that doesn't look very significant to a European country. Like, well, they purchased a few fighter jets for $1 billion. So what? But for a tiny country with a small budget, that might be a very, very big thing, and their government might be very happy about it. Also, it's one of those topics which is very easy to use for manipulation. In most countries use this kind of nationalist sentiment to make people proud of their country. Like, oh, we have developed a new jet, or we have bought new ships for our Coast Guard or whatever. And, don't underestimate how much certain leaders might value the factor of this and the opportunities that they gain for popularizing their government and themselves with their population. So yeah, this is something interesting to look at. Another very, very interesting thing, and I think this is something that people should pay more attention to. It's how much China is spending on R&D in this field, like how much they are spending on military-related research and development, and they have come very close to the US levels in these fields. And they're far, far ahead of South Korea, Japan, Germany. I think the combined German, Japanese, South Korean spending on research and development is not even near the Chinese. So this again in itself, it's neither good or bad, right? It's just something we have to know when we are assessing situations. It's just data, it's just facts. And if at some point we think, wow, China would make an amazing partner in R&D, then, well, this is good to know. Well, we know that they have a lot of know-how, they have a lot of well-built-up industry. We can learn a lot. It's for us to send our engineers there, to do exchange programs with them, and so on. If at some point China is an adversary, it's threatening a partner country, it's also good to know, right? We can have conversations with them to say, look, we can cooperate in R&D if you manage to defuse the tensions in these areas. So there are a lot of options and a lot of sensible things that you can use with this data. So again, this is all just very informative, and I love this kind of nicely detailed, neutral, professional, informative paper, which is not alarmist. It's not making any claims, not making any unwarranted comparisons, but it does give the data a global and a regional context as well, with the comparisons with the US and some of the European countries, and with the comparisons with Japan, the South Korean countries. I think this is very valuable, and this is the kind of stuff that we need a lot more of in the mainstream journals as well. Either way, we have hit the 1 hour mark with today's session. Thank you so much for those of you who have been with me. It was the hour that I spent on catching up on some policy and international affairs articles and papers. And I hope you found this helpful, informative, and interesting. If you have any questions, feel free to write to me. And you can type in the chat box as well, or you can send a message, you can leave a comment, and you can subscribe to the channel. I'll sometimes do these news reading sessions, as well as book reviews and some philosophical reflections. Thank you for your attention, and have a nice day. Bye.